coordinated global policy push for digital IDs as the new form government-issued identification credentials. And they're essentially all based on your biometric data, which can be your fingerprints, your face, your iris of your eyeball. And the idea is essentially to collect all of that data and have it housed or have it tied directly to your digital ID, so your physical ID will be mapped to the digital ID. Digital IDs are not really a separate project from CBDCs and this new digital financial system. And UN documentation and also documentation from the Bank of International Settlements, they very overtly state that CBDCs and digital IDs are meant to go together, and without digital IDs, the CBDC digital finance system cannot exist. One of the reasons it can't exist without that is because of the KYC functionality built into this digital financial system. They have the know your customer protocols. They have to know who you are. And so they want to have your wallet tied to a digital ID and have that digital ID be mapped to your physical ID through the biometric data collection. So there's different efforts to make digital IDs either as NFTs, non-fungible tokens. There's also the efforts of Sam Altman of OpenAI and his WorldCoin project, whereby you scan your iris, you give them the biometric credentials of your eyeball. They give you a unique identifier, a digital ID, and it's inherently tied to a digital wallet. That is the same model the UN is using. They've already implemented it for refugees getting food assistance from the World Food Program. It's called Building Blocks. It's on blockchain. It involves refugees scanning their irises, and in order to buy food or receive their rations, they have to check out of a grocery store style place in the refugee camp. They check out biometrically with an eyeball scan, and then the amount of food they have, the monetary value of that is subtracted from their digital wallet connected to their digital ID and their iris. It doesn't matter what country you're in or whether you're part of BRICS or part of the collective West, this is being rolled out across the board. One of the main reasons for this coordinated global push to develop digital IDs is because it's deemed essential to the entire Sustainable Development Agenda, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, also known as Agenda 2030. And the specific part dealing with digital IDs is within SDG 16, which is about building peaceful and inclusive societies. One of the indicators of SDG 16, 16.9, calls for legal identification for everyone in the world from the time they're born, essentially. The leading alliance that was launched under the auspices of the UN to accomplish that is known as ID 2020 and has since been folded into what is called the Digital Impact Alliance, which essentially has the same funders and founders as ID 2020. So ID 2020, the UN and other stakeholders in this particular sphere often argue that the reason this is necessary is because of what they call the identity gap. And the identity gap is the claim that the lack of digital ID is preventing people, mainly the world's poor, from accessing essential services, whether it's banking, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare. They claim the only way for these people to be able to access these services is to onboard them to these identity schemes. So what they mean by essential services is, they say without these forms of recognized identity, people in the world, mainly the world's poor, are unable to access bank accounts, unable to access healthcare, unable to access government services, a variety of things, because they don't have ID or they don't have bank accounts, things of that nature. So in order to allow everyone to access all of these things and include them, hence the frequent word of inclusion in all these documents, they say digital ID is the necessary way to bridge this identity gap. And if you look at how the UN sponsored groups like ID 2020 are constructing this, they're trying to hide behind a facade of decentralization and construct digital identity in a way that they call as vendor agnostic, meaning that any private company in theory could develop a digital ID system that people could use. So you'll have a variety of companies or government agencies issuing digital ID, and it will not look like a centralized digital ID, but it will be. Based on what's been developed so far by these entities, it seems like that database is meant to be housed at the World Bank, and it's called ID4D, and is sort of cloaked in the same rhetoric that ID 2020, cloaks their own project, claiming it's decentralized and all of this, but it's a centralized global data set where all these different digital ID systems can export their data to. The World Bank's interesting in the sense that, the World Bank, the IMF, they essentially use a debt slavery model to enforce policy objectives on national governments. And the World Bank has openly said that debt is a critical form of financing for the Sustainable Development Goals. So basically saddle a country in debt, and instead of having it enact austerity policies and things like that, it's to get them to enact digital ID. It's to get them to enact, financial inclusion, as they call it, with the CBDCs and their public-private sector equivalents, things of that nature. So that's how they force nation states to act as these enabling environments for these policies. A lot of it is through debt slavery, essentially. One thing people don't realize about the digital ID thing too is that there's a push not just to have people have digital ID, but literally everything alive have a digital ID. So Larry Fink talked about this when he recently talked about how he views the tokenization of real world assets moving forward. Everything's going to be on this universal ledger and have its unique identifier. He recently was very overt about how there's going to be a universal ledger where all transactions are tracked, essentially, and that this is key to this new financial system that's being created that involves digital IDs. It also involves global carbon markets and, the CBDC digital currency model. All of that is going to be on this centralized database. That's what Fink is saying. And a lot of this new system is tied up with the push for global carbon markets, whereby natural assets, which is a new asset class they're creating, are also going to have these unique identifiers. So for example, there's a lot of efforts right now, for example, to tokenize rainforests for the purpose of using it in this global carbon market. So that rainforest will also be given a unique identifier, digital ID. So just like digital IDs are inherently exclusionary and being sold as a tool for inclusion, CBDCs and also digital IDs are being framed as decentralized when in reality they're very centralized. So in the case of digital IDs, there's this push to create decentralized IDs, they call it, where your credentials are only unencrypted on a need-to-know basis. And, that sounds great in practice, but in reality, these rely on what they call trusted third parties to verify those credentials. And those are the same government agencies and big banks and other entities that are those same trusted third parties. So it's really not as decentralized as a lot of their proponents would like to claim. When you move into this digital currency era where the banks are issuing these stable coins, these deposit tokens that are programmable money, it's not just programmable, they're going to be sharing this data in the same database that the CIA and any other intelligence agency can access whenever they want without a warrant. This is like baking in warrantless spying on Americans into the new system to come. So there's no more Congress needing to pass, the laws that facilitate FISA warrants and stuff like that have sort of been the existing infrastructure to institutionalize warrantless spying on Americans. This is a way to literally make it a part of the infrastructure from the get-go. No more secret FISA courts, or you don't need any of that infrastructure anymore. It is the new system.